friend of mine, after listening to the news quite a bit, came into my condo in Florida and said, "Tell me about socialism." And I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" And he started right in, "Oh, it's those Russians and horrible murders and Venezuela." And he just started rattling off words and terms. And I said, "Do you know that I happen to come from the city which had the first socialist mayor in America? And that was way back in 1900. And if a jaw could be heard to drop, his dropped."
So, Pat, why don't you start by telling how you came across the history of socialism with Haverhill?
Well, that would have been a part of my research for the book I did called Haverhill in New England City. I did back in the 1980s.
I was wondering if you could introduce yourself.
My name is Jim Fiorentini. I'm the mayor of Haverhill, Massachusetts.
Can you introduce yourself real quick? Tell me who you are and what you did.
Well, I'm so glad to be here with you today. I'm Stuart Weitzman. I've been known as a shoe designer, and I'm proud of that. I began my career actually in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
We'd like you to talk about Haverhill, your connection, and at socialism.
Start with Haverhill.
Okay.
In the heart of Haverhill, Massachusetts, a city known for its industrial roots, a remarkable story of socialism emerged, a story that would shape the lives of countless workers and redefine the social landscape of America. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were times of sweeping social, economic, and political upheaval. Industrialization and urbanization brought new opportunities, but also deepened inequalities and labor exploitation. Haverhill, with its booming shoe industry, became a microcosm of these broader trends.
The American labor movement was born in this area, Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill.
At the end of the 19th century, in response to rising inequalities in the United States, socialism flourished in industrial cities across the country.
The socialism that was showing up in the 19th century had a lot to do with offsetting the imbalance in society.
One of the first cities to reap the benefit of socialism's surge was Haverhill, a small town on the border of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, famous for its shoes.
Between Haverhill and some neighboring towns, 90% of all shoes worn by women until about 1970 were made in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and the surrounding community.
Haverhill experienced a population boom at the end of the 19th century, thanks to the shoe industry, which permanently defined its identity. By 1890, an average of 11,000 workers were employed in 236 establishments, which meant around 1/3 of the total city population worked in the shoe industry.
At one time, 10,000 people every day worked in the shoe factories here in the city of Haverhill, including at various times my grandparents.
A little over 30% of shoe workers were women, a good deal of whom migrated from small New England and Canadian towns up north because there were more benefits to working a skilled shoe job than a less skilled, lower-paid textile job. Shoe jobs were incredibly sexed. Women did the stitching, whereas men worked as finishers, trimmers, packers, cutters, lasters, and bottomers. Many workers, especially young women workers, were unmarried and itinerant. They rented rooms in boarding houses and formed close ties with the roommates and homeowners they lived with. Clearly, as the town's architecture, layout, demographics, and social bonds were shaped by industry needs, shoes had left their imprint on Haverhill.
I have a very extensive collection of antique shoes that tell the history of America and how women really were thought of in society based upon the kind of footwear they wore or could wear, because there were rules restricting certain classes of people to certain kinds of products.
The nature of the shoe industry affected local labor relations as well. Typically, 2 or 3 partners owned one shoe manufacturing plant, and partners lived in the city of Haverhill. They participated in local government, served on the boards of trustees for the public library and YMCA, held memberships in civil societies like the Pentucket Club, Masonic Orders, and Oddfellows, typical marks of active and invested civic men. it was indeed quite normal for workers to know, live next to, and sit at town meetings with their bosses. The Haverhill community web, of which shoemakers made up more than a third, was multi-class. Yet things weren't always so harmonious for the working class in Haverhill. The shoe industry, like any industry, was heavily subject to market booms and busts that could, and indeed did, destabilize intimate labor relations.
If you worked in the shoe factories, it was hard work, it was tough work.
The same male worker could earn $10 a week on a good week and less than $3 a week on a bad week. For women who made $5 a week on average, the situation was far worse.
I was just talking to my brother-in-law. He said his mother worked in the shoe factories for years and years. And when they switched from hourly wages to piecework, she would work incredible hours, and she would bring the work home so that she could do it and make a little bit more money.
The Depression years of the early 1890s especially affected Haverhill workers. Between January 1st, 1887 and June 30th, 1894, the city experienced 10 lockouts. There were 4,436 employees thrown out of work, $100,606 in total wages lost, $5,900 assistance distributed by labor organizations, and 60,400 total employees lost. In an attempt to offset huge recession losses, some local manufacturers slashed salaries, fired employees, and cut hours. These austere measures, along with the introduction of the unpopular ironclad contract, culminated in the Great Haverhill Shoe Strike of 1895. According to historian Mary Blewett, Haverhill's three largest and newest factories adopted a newer, harsher contract after the 1890 slump. The so-called iron contract required that employees deposit $1 out of 5 per week, a fifth of their salary, to the company as a security against the worker leaving without giving a 2-week notice. The deposit, as per the contract, would be returned to workers annually with 7% interest, though full returns rarely happened. Often, bosses discharged workers for poor work before they could withdraw their accruing security deposits and kept the money for themselves. These cost-saving measures forced smaller shoe manufacturers to cut wages to compete with the larger town factories, triggering a town-wide strike. On January 1st, 1895, Haverhill shoe workers kicked off their strike with a parade of 2,000 in the snow. Afterward, they congregated in the public halls of the city to listen to speeches on the strike situation, labor in America, unions, and the like. 3 women, Frances Willard, Lady Henry Somerset, and Amy Hicks, gave speeches that day as part of their Women and Labor Movement lecture series across the U.S. Strike leaders quickly organized and marshaled support from large numbers of unskilled foreign workers, chiefly Jewish, Italian, and Armenian males who, with training on new machines, threatened the jobs, wages, and status of the strikers. To organize this immigrant workforce and feature them in the strike parades was a blow to the strategy of the managers of the large factories.
Immigrants all worked in the shoe factories back in those days. And at the mill where my grandfather worked in Lawrence, they used to divide the immigrants up and have different immigrants working next to each other so that they couldn't communicate with each other and couldn't organize a union or a strike.
This unique mashup of ethnically diverse, skilled, and unskilled labor garnered a good deal of community support for their cause. In fact, because workers made up 1/3 of the city population, and because they formed intricate and powerful community bonds, non-striking Haverhill folk overwhelmingly supported the strike. Blewett writes, the initial phase of the strike received widespread support from the communities, led by the small factory owners, the professional class, almost all of the Protestant and Catholic clergy, local businessmen, and retailers. As the dispute took its toll on the local economy, community support for the strike faded. Non-striking townfolk called for arbitration, which they figured would bring the dispute to a speedy close. Yet the shoe unions were not ready to settle at that point in time. With local patience and thus assistance waning, workers need to reach outside of town borders for support and funding. It was precisely here that national unions, many with prominent socialists among their leadership ranks, gained serious traction in Haverhill.
Folks who talk about socialism don't know what socialism is. I mean, Bernie Sanders is an interesting guy, a lot of respect for him, but he's no socialist. Because socialists, real socialists, believe that government should own the means of production. I mean, Bernie is just a good New Deal, fair deal liberal. Believes that every American, especially working American, should have decent, affordable health care. The kids ought to be able to go to college without going bankrupt. But, this is not socialism.
Socialism and its early theorists rose to prominence during the Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century. In its most basic interpretation, socialism is defined as a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Grandfathers of modern socialism certainly believed in this core ideological tenet. The nationalization of all and every industry for the benefit of all, they argued, was the project's most important end, and the only way to achieve economic and political justice in the modern industrial era.
Simply having liberty for all did not give equality for all.
The working class, early socialists wrote, simply do not see the fruits of their labor in a capitalist society. Rather, the industrialist capitalist, who owns the production process, the boss or the CEO, does, and he gets richer and richer even though he does not labor himself. Socialism has a long, strong, and successful history in the United States that dates well before Bernie Sanders' insurgency campaign in 2016. As early as the 19th century, a handful of utopian socialist communities sprung up across America. Small communities of ideological socialists acquired land and lived together in cooperatives, farming, eating, working, and parenting as one unit.
Haverhill was a small agricultural community in the 1800s, and the city leaders made a very deliberate effort to start the shoe factories and to bring in immigrants from around the world.
Brook Farm was founded by Transcendentalist minister George Ripley in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Modeled on the French socialist philosophy of Fourierism, the purpose of the farm, in George Ripley's words, was to combine the thinker and the worker as far as possible in the same individual, to guarantee the highest mental freedom by providing all with labor adapted to their tastes and talents, and securing to them the fruits of their industry, to do away with the necessity of menial services by opening the benefits of education and the profits of labor to all, and thus to prepare a society of liberal, intelligent, and cultivated persons whose relations with each other would permit a more simple and wholesome life than can be led amidst the pressure of our competitive institutions. States that otherwise identify as capitalists can, and indeed do successfully, legislate policies that borrow from and bleed into socialism.
A number of places like Lawrence and Lowell were creating municipal health services, their own hospital. The general category of what was meant by socialism to these people, to provide better services to the population as a whole.
The New Deal is perhaps the best example of this, but Social Security, strong welfare policy, and government-provided health care are also ideologically socialist, and they are among the most popular government policies in the United States. In fact, 81% of Americans don't mind paying Social Security taxes because it provides security and stability to millions of retired Americans, disabled individuals, and the children and widowed spouses of deceased workers. In their view, the federal government has an obligation to fund and sustain a strong social safety net for its most vulnerable citizens.
There are things that people thought a city government should be able to provide, that you shouldn't have to rely upon independent capitalists to do it.
Setting the socialist scene in Haverhill, the question of electoral politics was a contentious one among folks on the American left in the 20th century. Strike at the ballot box was one slogan early socialists loved to fall back on.
What politics is all about is which side do you want? That's how people vote.
Populist candidate for Massachusetts State Representative was a local populist turned socialist named James F. Carey. Carey was a local man born out of local conditions. He worked in the shoe industry as a heel cutter, had 4 sisters who also worked in the Haverhill shoe industry, and organized workers, endorsed women's suffrage, and attended meetings during the strike. Born to a couple of Irish working-class immigrants who settled in Haverhill in the 1850s, the Careys came to America for the same reason most Irish men and women sailed across the Atlantic at the time, to flee the Great Famine, which swept their native land like a plague, killing 20 to 25% of the total population. Carey's father, James Sr., worked as a day laborer and sometimes shoemaker in the city. His mother, Mary, cared for 6 children at home. Neither parent was literate, according to the 1870 census, though their children, James included, attended school. Inspired by early Christian socialist theorist Edward Bellamy, Carey identified first as a nationalist, next as a populist, and last as a socialist, taking on the third label shortly after the 1895 shoe strike kicked off. After what author Henry Bedford calls a discouraging political campaign in 1895, the Socialist Labor Party ran James Carey on the top of the mayoral ticket. Though Carey did not win in 1896, the Haverhill Gazette still thought his 10% showing was significant. 6 months later, in a special election, the percentage of votes cast for Carey climbed again, even as the total number of votes cast went down, as was normally the case in off-season elections. Support for socialism was growing in the city of Haverhill. The Gazette welcomed the leftist surge. Quote, "Why not elect a few brainy men by way of variety," reporters wrote. Socialism, after all, would, quote, "be a benefit and not a curse to the city of Haverhill, insofar as it promised to beat back, quote, those whose highest ambition is to live on the earnings of others."
In Haverhill, one of the big concerns was the water supply. The water supply was privately owned, which meant that the public officials had no way to influence them. In the 1890s, the trolleys come into existence in Haverhill, and all of a sudden, you have reasons to expand along the trolley lines. A gentleman named William Knight decided to create a shoe factory after the Great Fire in the 1880s. He wanted to put a shoe factory way out at the far edge of Bradford, almost on the North Andover line, a good 2 or 3 miles from Bradford populace in general. And he put up not just a factory, which is now restaurant, Joseph's. Not only a factory, but a whole series of boarding houses, single-family houses, and he created a village right around the factory. And then he said to the Bradford Aqueduct Company, "Would you please bring your water pipes out here?" And the sewer pipes said, "No." And the city could ask it, it could request it, but if the private company didn't want to do it, nothing you could do about it.
For the 1897 campaign, the second labor activist, John Chase, replaced Carey at the head of the mayoral ticket. Carey instead decided to run for the Common Council from the 5th Ward, where, according to author Henry Bedford, socialist support had steadily grown. Bedford continues, the platform included democratic reform, such as the initiative and referendum, municipal ownership of some public utilities, and public works projects for the unemployed. Other planks were of local importance: abolition of unguarded railway crossings, a longtime concern of reform groups in the city, and free clothing for children who would otherwise be unable to attend school. Chase, unlike Carey, was not native to Haverhill or even Massachusetts. Born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, Chase spent most of his early childhood moving around the Grand Estate. Moreover, shortly after his father died in an accident, Chase started working in the New Hampshire mills to help support his struggling family. He was just 9 years old. Later on in his life, Chase entered the New Hampshire shoe industry, working in the trade for about 8 years. In 1890, he, his mother, and his sister moved to Haverhill, Massachusetts, where he continued to make shoes. Drawn first into the labor movement and then into the burgeoning socialist movement, Chase was seen by factory operatives as too dangerous and unsustainable of a hire, an unapologetic activist and radical. So he was forced to take a job at a cooperative grocery store, which he also founded. Fed up with the state of the city and the country writ large, Chase decided once and for all to enter municipal politics as a candidate and picked up, literally, where Carey left off.
I know that there was a big election in Haverhill in the 1920s. I don't know the exact year. If people believe you're on their side, you understand their pain, then they're going to vote for you. If they think you're on somebody else's side, they're not going to vote for you.
Chase and Carey worked rigorously on the hottest campaign the city ever knew in 1897. Further, much unlike their Democratic and Republican opponents, Socialists largely relied on a sweeping grassroots effort and outside financial support, delivering soapbox orations, distributing pamphlets, and organizing lecture series with collections in Boston and other major American cities.
In those days, the shoe union would put up a candidate from there. And I'll tell you more about this. And the shoe factory owners, they had an owners association. They would put up candidates. Now you would think that the workers, there's a lot more workers than there are owners. You would think that the workers would win every election, wouldn't you? But they didn't, because the workers would be divided.
Chase lost to another candidate named Chase, Republican Daniel Chase, by 2,234 votes, while James Carey was elected to the Common Council with 909 votes. While Carey's victory was significant, the Socialist Labor Party and its hardline leader, Daniel De Leon, did not think much of the apparent socialist gains in Haverhill. This apathy marked the beginning of a drawn-out fissure between the Socialist Haverhill locale and the national SLP that would force Carey and Chase to leave the party and join instead the Social Democrats, the brainchild of famous American socialist Eugene Victor Debs.
There really are enormous varieties of socialism. And what was happening in Haverhill was a particular brand that had become very popular in Europe called municipal socialism.
De Leon and Debs both identified as socialists, but their means to socialist ends differed dramatically. While De Leon preached theory and demanded ideological uniformity, Debs stressed material gains and welcomed more diverse perspectives. A popular orator, Debs attracted all sorts of folks, unionists, anarchists, progressives, and believed that was the key to achieving a more economically equitable society. Carey was, as one SLP official close to him would alert De Leon, going Debsward, and in 1898, the Haverhill local officially withdrew from the Socialist Labor Party. It wasn't until 1898, 2 years and 3 elections after socialists first tried their hand at municipal politics, that Haverhill, and thus America writ large, elected its first socialist mayor under the auspices of Eugene Debs' Social Democratic Party. With Chase in the mayor's office and Carey in the Common Council, socialists could finally get to work in the city. The socialist presses, save of course De Leon's people, were ecstatic. The Herald and Appeal to Reason both published glowing articles about Chase and the state of the party in Haverhill, and the elation only grew as Chase's inauguration neared. Was this the beginning of a new economic order? Was this the coming of a world in which the government played a greater role and businesses were run humanely by the workers for the workers? And was Haverhill, Massachusetts, the seed of a fundamentally transformative economic, social, and political movement in the United States?
Racism, the anti-Semitism, the religious pressures, all that kind of stuff, it's all part of the world we grew up in. And for whatever reason, I reacted very strongly to it, and always have.
Yet not everyone believed that Haverhill fit into this narrative of great, sweeping proletarian revolution. Rather, socialists triumphed in the shoemaking city, they believed, because of clear forces ranging from Republican disunity to James Carey's personal charm. Moreover, Haverhill socialists were relatively moderate compared to their national counterparts, including Debs himself. So whether the city of shoes and its fearless leaders were truly and completely socialist frequently came up for debate among contemporaries and scholars writing on Haverhill nearly a century later. Though out and proud socialists, local officials in Haverhill would govern like any good mayor or city councilor, attuned to the needs of the city.
Equality had to be more than just a vote. It had to be a chance to improve your life and that sort of thing. And if, for example, you are a person who has lost an arm or a leg in the textile mill, you're not going to be able to ever have equality with someone because there was no way to ever earn an income again.
Carey's tenure on the Common Council, according to Henry Bedford, was not disappointing to his supporters. As Bedford writes, Carey's committee appointments were splendid, and his open administration of the business of the merited the thanks of the voters. Moreover, though Carey tried and failed to raise the minimum wage to $2 an hour, he stared down the local railway company and refused to accept their customary pass. The Haverhill Gazette praised his resilience during the debacle, writing that Carey had triumphed by the mere force of his example in accomplishing much good. Carey also stood up for aggrieved workers at council meetings, uprooted fraud before it happened, held companies accountable for those who refused to abide by a local wage amendment, and introduced a bill to run public utilities underground for the first time, which the Gazette thought was sound, albeit expensive. He and Chase neither taxed churches nor abolished marriage, a charge so often lobbied at socialists by their detractors, and both men were remarkably transparent in their political deals, nominating candidates in open caucus as opposed to secret meetings. According to Bedford, Haverhill socialists even, quote, brought the city one step nearer to the 8-hour day and the abolition of grade crossings, and they built sewers and streets cheaper than previous administrations. So successful and inoffensive were the Haverhill socialites, the Gazette went so far as to urge Carey to aim for higher office, writing on August 25, 1898, that President Carey would make a very useful member of the legislature, and the Gazette hopes to see him there one of those days. Running for a second term, Carey secured over 60% of the vote in his district, while Chase won his 1898 re-election campaign by a plurality of 223 votes. In an era when most American socialists found political action distinctly unrewarding, results in Haverhill seem to promise that socialism could indeed be achieved by ballot and to provide an alternative for the violence of proletarian revolution. Haverhill socialists not only won elections, they had adapted their ideology to the realities and needs of an American industrial center.
You know, immigrants have always had a struggle everywhere they go. And there's always been prejudices that my grandparents would have to put up with. My grandfather helped to found the Italian-American Credit Union because none of the banks would lend money to Italians. But despite those obstacles, which, you know, they faced and were able to overcome, immigrants were welcome. And that's what we need to have today. I want everyone that comes to Haverhill to be as welcome as my grandparents were, without the barriers that they had to overcome.
My mother was this bright little kid. She was 9 when she got here. So far as we can determine, was the first Greek girl ever to go away to college unescorted in the history of the United States. Was unheard of at the time. And went to Bates College in Worcester, Maine. On her own. Did very well, graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 1925, became a school teacher. You know, a great, typical American story, but unusual in the Greek community at the time. And she was remarkable. Lived until she was 100. Huge influence on me in many ways, and just a great person. And it all started effectively in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
You know the big mural on Essex Street on the side?
Yeah.
If you look at that mural, it's a mural of about 40 different Haverhill citizens. Every one of them is recognized for something. Perhaps its most renowned citizen was Louis B. Mayer. You've heard of MGM,
Yes.
the movie studio?
Yep. Yep.
That's Metro Goldwyn Mayer. Louis B. Mayer helped found MGM.
Oh,
His
yeah.
first theater was in Haverhill.
Wow, I didn't know
And
that.
in that picture, you see him at a movie projector, way before the era of videos, you know, the way movies were shown. And up on the screen is someone making a shoe. And that's me.
The best surgical technician at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, a Harvard teaching hospital, was Ruby Sampson, the oldest in a family of 13 of a Georgia sharecropper. Came to Boston, married, divorced, 3 kids. They've been on welfare for 14 years. That woman became the best surgical technician at that hospital. All of her kids went on to college. That's what happens. Those are the kinds of things we ought to be doing. Is that socialism? No, I don't know what it is. I think it's what makes sense and what we ought to be doing. And we ought to be doing a lot more.
I don't know if I persuaded my friend down in Florida
Oh, I think so.
that socialism is not that frightening.
Going back to my younger days, along the tracks of my daddy's ways, I stopped, listened to the sound of this work town. It was known around the world back then. How could it be that it was my friend when I see those broken buildings that once thrived? There's still old men around Libro's bar, placing their bets with the guys in the car. The bag lady Grace is gone. Who will carry on? I feel it in the air, from the river to the square. There's a heart still here in Shoe City. Shoe City, Shoe City. There's that big old river, it stretches to the north, lifeblood of the region, the wealth it brought forth. My man there, she lived down in Phoenix Road, in that same brick building where she used to stitch leather with old French men and Irish women. The pennies that she made never led to gold. You know the old mill rail, it's still here. It was rusted and bent and now it goes somewhere.